On November 3rd, 2021, I posted a video to this YouTube channel titled Sinner versus Alcaraz, Who Will Be Better? At this point in time, Sinner was world number 9. Alcaraz was world number 35. Neither man had ever won a big title. They had just played for the first time at the Paris Masters. A lot has happened in the 4 years since. So we are going to watch this video together from 2021, see what I got right, what I got wrong, and overall what we can learn about what the viewpoint, at least my viewpoint, was of these two guys when they were in the very early stages of their development as professionals. Here we go. The question I've gotten over the last couple of years more than any other question is, who's going to be the next number one? Who's going to be the next guy to dominate men's tennis? And then all the time I'm presented with the options Zverev, Tsitsipas, Medvedev, and whenever that happens I say, okay, wait a second, I'm fine comparing Medvedev, Tsitsipas, Zverev. I'm fine comparing those guys, but there should be no assumption that the next player to become number one and dominate the sport and win multiple majors, there should be no assumption that that player is going to be from that generation. Don't forget about Jannik Sinner. Don't forget about Carlos Alcaraz. And quite frankly, don't forget about whoever's next, whoever's coming after Carlos Alcaraz, although they will probably come around too late, whereas someone else that is not named Novak Djokovic or Rafael Nadal or Roger Federer will probably be winning multiple majors. All right, this was obviously a great start. I mean, I'll take the W on that one because that take aged extremely well. You got to remember what point in time we were in late 2021. Novak Djokovic almost won the calendar Grand Slam, and Daniil Medvedev just had won his first major at the US Open. Nadal was still playing really well, and come the start of 2022, Rafa would actually win the first two majors of the year, and then Novak would win Wimbledon. So this was still a point. Roger was having health issues. There was some uncertainty there. But Novak and Rafa were still playing really well. They were clearly better players, more talented players than the OG next gen of the 90s, the 90s guys. Clearly better players. And they weren't showing a ton of signs of physical decline. So at this point, my thinking was Novak and Rafa probably have a couple more years of winning, slam winning tennis in them. And hold on a sec. If we fast forward a couple years, how do we know that other guys like Sinner and Alcaraz would not have at this point developed enough in order to be better? They could get leapfrogged. And so obviously that was a good take at that point in time. Don't forget about Sinner. Don't forget about Alcaraz. And then you have that sub-conversation of who's going to be better, Jannik Sinner or Carlos Alcaraz? Which team are you on? Well, they finally played those two in Paris, second round, and it was Carlos Alcaraz in straight sets, 7-6, 7-5. I'm going to talk about that match, and then I'm going to talk about who I think is going to be better between Jannik Sinner and Carlos Alcaraz. Well, first of all, this was a good match in Paris. There was not a lot between these two, and it was very, very tight. One of the things I found interesting was the court didn't look very slow. Paris has been playing incredibly slow. These guys both hit so big. They're both so powerful that the conditions didn't look very slow at all. And that was nice to see. They have revolutionized power off the ground in tennis. So that was somewhat evident as early as 2021. A lot of great rallies here. First set goes to a tiebreak. And I felt the main difference for Carlos here was the outer edges of the game. Those auxiliary shots. Not your forehand off the ground, not your backhand off the ground, not your serve, not your return. That's the foundation. That's the basis for your game. Where I felt Alcaraz found an edge was those outer edges. Your drop shot, your lob, your volleys. Your overhead would be counted in that category. Your slices, And I felt that Alcaraz, where he was really better, was volleys, drop shots, lobs, figuring out those extra ways to win those points, to finish points especially, would be the main key. Those extra ways that you can reach into your back pocket and you can finish points, or you can pass a player at the net. Those extra options there, or you can find creative ways to defend. That's where I felt Alcaraz was better. And you take the tiebreak, for example, and you look at the Love 1 point where Sinner has a swing volley right on top of the net, a forehand swing volley, and he hits it middle. He doesn't hit it in a good spot. And Alcaraz has the ball in his backhand, and he hits a beautiful lob for a winner. Well, Sinner should have finished here. He was in a winning position, and he doesn't win the point because he doesn't execute at net, and then Alcaraz executes a field shot for the pass. Then you go to 3-love. At this point, this is almost a must-win point for Jannik Sinner in the first set tiebreak. Well, Alcaraz gets Sinner on the run. He hits a forehand drop shot down the line, and then Sinner makes a good dig cross court. And Alcaraz, from just in front of the baseline, hits a swing volley on the backhand side down the line for a winning passing shot. Alcaraz using the drop shot and using a swing volley off from an awkward spot in the court from the baseline. These are not foundational skills. These are shots that you don't practice a lot, shots that normally it takes a player a long time in their career until they're polished. And then, by the way, at 5-1, Sinner has a volley that he punches too deep, and Alcaraz gets there and hits an on-the-run forehand cross-court pass. It actually hit the net cord, but if it didn't hit the net tape, then it would have been a winner anyway, so I don't feel that it was really a lucky shot. Regardless, it's another shot that Sinner was in a winning position, should have finished at the net, did not, and Alcaraz ended up winning the point. And this was a problem for Sinner in the match. His volleys were not quite good enough, and Alcaraz's speed and his ability to hit passing shots was really on display here. If you look at net points won, Sinner was 10 for 26. That's a win percentage of 38%. Alcaraz was 12 for 16. That's a win percentage of 75%.
This sounds a lot like a conversation we could be having in 2025 about Carlos Alcaraz's varietal shot making, his varietal finishing. Something that for him is natural. And for Jannik Sinner, it's learned. And there's still a difference there. There's still a gap. That was kind of what I'm talking about right here in 2021. Still true in 2025, even though Sinner has worked so hard to improve those aspects of his game, primarily in order to beat opponents like Medvedev, Zverev, and Djokovic, who are at this point in time kind of dominating Sinner because they were having a pretty easy time absorbing his linear power. All right, let's continue.
Alcaraz was a lot more sure of himself, finishing points from winning positions. He's got a fantastic drop shot. He's got really good volleys. He has a comfortable overhead. And of course, he can use the big forehand with a lot of comfort. In the second set, I thought it was a very competitive set, and it came down to this 5-all game where Jannik Sinner hit at least 3 forehand errors. It might have been 4, and I tried to tweet out, was that 4 unforced errors? And nobody replied. So I'm not really sure. If it was 3, it was at least 3. It might have been 4 forehand unforced errors, or at least errors, at that 5-all game to give Alcaraz the break of serve, and Alcaraz serves it out at 6-5. I felt that Sinner was not quite within himself in this match, and he was taking a lot of risk from the baseline, and it seemed like, with finishing with 13 winners to 26 unforced errors, I thought that Alcaraz's speed was making Sinner a little bit anxious. And one of the things that I really like about Sinner's game is his patience in baseline rallies, how serene and how calm he is in a rally where he's hitting the ball huge. He's hitting absolutely massive, but it feels rather safe. It feels very repeatable. And it feels like he can do it over and over again without error. I thought that there was a little bit of extra aggression in the Jannik Sinner game that was a little bit desperate and a little bit anxious. and it resulted in a lot of unforced errors.
All right, that's really interesting. First of all, Sinner clearly had a very leaky forehand game at 5-all in the second set here. That's something that he's kind of cut out. Sinner's forehand has gotten far, far more reliable than it was at that point in his career. So he's improved that. I'm glad that even at that point in 2021, it was clear that Sinner's regular high percentage rally ball had a lot of speed. Like, that is still probably the thing that most players talk about after facing Jannik. The thing that makes him most special is how within himself he can play while pushing the ordinary boundaries of pace on a regular trade from the back of the court. So I saw that in 2021. It's interesting, but Alcaraz's speed, I felt at this point, kind of squeezed him and made him go for a little bit too much and overplay.
Both players are at different stages in their career with the serve. I think Sinner has a better serve than Alcaraz right now, and Carlos is still trying to hone that, still trying to make those improvements, where Sinner has already made a lot of the early adjustments in his career that he's needed to make his serve better. So that's one difference, and I thought that Sinner was good with the +1 aggression. I think he was good on his serve in the second set for the most part, but ultimately he loses a close match here to Carlos Alcaraz.
Alcaraz's serve was pretty terrible in 2021. It was completely de-emphasized. I think it was clear to see that Alcaraz's serve was de-emphasized when he was a teenager, that it was not a huge priority. And it really showed when he first got on tour, because his serve was nothing to fear. And he doesn't really get enough credit for how quickly that shot has gotten better. I mean, it's only been 4 years, and it's a night and day difference. But it's interesting that I already saw Sinner tinkering, adjusting in 2021, because obviously it would be a long road for Jannik continuing to make his serve better. He was by no means satisfied by his level of serving at this point in his career. And I would not have guessed that this early on, I was already seeing Sinner make adjustments in his serve. I thought that didn't happen until later on, but clearly 2021 me had already spotted that.
So who do I think is going to be better? I don't like to oversimplify things, but in this case, I like to oversimplify it. Carlos Alcaraz reminds me of the Big Four because his athleticism is ultra special, in the sense that if you're a professional tennis player, you're in the 1% of athletes. Well, Alcaraz is in the 1% of the 1%. And that is something that I always like to remind myself of when it came to the Big Four, that the best athletes in the sport, and when I say athletes, I'm not talking about the serve. I'm not talking about the forehand or the backhand. I'm just talking about movement around the court. That's all I'm talking about right now. The best athletes in the sport, that 0.01%, were the Big Four. You have to include Murray in this because he's in there. Nobody moved with the efficiency. Nobody moves with the efficiency of Federer. Nobody moves with the balance and agility of Djokovic. Nobody moves with the power of Nadal. Nobody moves with the lasting endurance of Andy Murray. All of these players were exceptional 0.01% athletes, and you can't teach that. They're all hard workers off the court. Extraordinarily hard workers off the court, but you can't teach that athleticism. That is genetic lottery athleticism. And I think Carlos Alcaraz has that. His movement reminds me a lot of Novak Djokovic, the way he is so balanced in the corners, moving into the corners, quite agile and flexible as well. And also Rafael Nadal. I think there's a lot of power, a lot of fast twitch acceleration in his movement, and a lot of strength, a lot of fast twitch muscle fibers in that forehand where he's 6'1", but is he? Because I saw Sinner and Alcaraz shake hands at the net, and Sinner looks about 3 inches taller than Alcaraz. But Sinner is listed at 6'2", and Alcaraz is listed at 6'1". So somebody's height is off there.
I think it was Sinner's. I think Sinner's height was off there.
Guarantee you, someone's height is off. I'm not really sure who it is. But Alcaraz, for his size, hits absolutely massive off the forehand wing as well. So all of these things, he comes together in this athletic package that I think is very, very unique. I think reminds me of a bit of a hybrid between Djokovic and Nadal. And I am biased towards that because of what I've seen work throughout my life. And, my childhood, I grew up and it was the big four. That was how I grew up in the sport. And as a result, I grew up with a bit of a bias towards movement and athleticism in the modern baseline game. Jannik Sinner, does he move well? Yes. Has he fast improved the movement? Absolutely. 100%. His legs are getting stronger and stronger. His movement has rapidly improved. No doubt about that. But Jannik Sinner is just another top tennis player. He's just another pro. He's great. He's an extraordinary athlete. But he's not a special athlete. Relative to top 50 men's tennis players, right? Relative to regular people, of course, he's a special athlete. Relative to even tennis players, he's a special athlete. Relative to like a top 10 player, I don't even want to make it top 50. Relative to a top 10 player, he's not a special athlete. Jannik Sinner, what makes him special?
All right, so let's pause it there. Probably the first statement that you might hear now, and it's like, ooh, that doesn't sound great. Again, when I'm talking about athleticism, I'm only talking about the legs. And at this point in time, Sinner's legs were average for a top player. They were not very, very special. Where Sinner has most surprised me, what I did not see coming, is how far he has been able to push his athletic development. His quickness around the court, his balance moving into the corners, his sliding when he's stretched out wide. I never foresaw at this point in time that those areas would get so strong for Jannik Sinner. I did not think it was possible for him. Watching him in 2021 as an athlete, I never thought he'd end up reaching the heights that he has now reached. That said, it's still not quite on a Carlos Alcaraz level. Alcaraz's genetic lottery athleticism is still at a higher level than Jannik's.
And I'm totally really high on both of these guys. I'm high on Jannik Sinner. I've gushed about him in the past. I love his mentality. I love that he is improving and improving and improving and tinkering. And that does remind me of the big three. Very much so. The tinkering, the constant improvement. But athletically, it's Alcaraz.
It's interesting with Sinner and the tinkering that I could see this as soon as 2021, because that continued, and that has continued from that point where it's probably Sinner's best quality. He is perpetually unsatisfied by where he's currently at. And the work rate and the rate of improvement was evident even back then.
Athletically, Alcaraz has it, and that's why I think he has an advantage. As their careers go on, I think he has an advantage. And by the way, if you're going to look at just tennis, and one area where Sinner has an advantage right now, I mentioned the serve, but Sinner's a little bit older and has had more time to develop that. The backhand is better, no doubt about that. So he's a little bit more even, where Alcaraz is more forehand-centric. If you make Alcaraz hit enough backhands, you're in a pretty good spot. Where Sinner, there's really nowhere to hide.
That's not really true in 2025. I mean, Alcaraz's backhand can hang with Jannik's. I would still take Sinner's, but by a very, very small margin. And the fact that Alcaraz can just incorporate so much variety off the backhand side, and he's so good with the runaround footwork and using his forehand from the ad side, it's no longer really a viable way to beat Alcaraz is to pin him in his backhand corner or pepper the backhand. That really has never become a pathway to beating Carlos. And even like Sinner and Alcaraz in nowadays engaged in a backhand exchange, Carlos can hang in there pretty well.
And Sinner has a really overwhelming power that I do think Alcaraz does kind of bring on the forehand. You know, in truth, it's not easy for me to think of areas where I can guarantee you, besides the backhand, where I can guarantee you that Jannik Sinner 10 years from now is going to be better than Carlos Alcaraz. So I'm Team Alcaraz here, and I could be wrong, and these things are hard to predict. You know, we're talking about development and longevity, and could there be injuries, and could there be things mentally that we haven't learned yet because we haven't seen Carlos Alcaraz in big finals at big events? Yeah, you know, all of these things are yet to be seen.
He'll do pretty well mentally in the big finals. Yeah, that record is ridiculous in big finals. So 2021 me didn't know that, but we know now.
I don't think that Jannik Sinner has been dynamite mentally in his career. I love his desire to get better and to tinker and improve, yes, but you know, I thought he was pretty poor in the biggest match of his life so far in the Miami final. But nonetheless, I don't really want to talk about that because I think Jannik Sinner is going to be great. I think he's going to be great. And I'm really looking forward to watching this rivalry play out. Right now, again, if you want me to keep it simple, I'm Team Carlos Alcaraz because you just can't teach that athleticism. And the rest of the game looks pretty polished as well. What did I just talk about? Drop shots, lobs, field shots, volleys, variety. Better than Jannik Sinner at this stage in their careers. And he's the better athlete. Sinner, meat and potatoes right now, better than Carlos Alcaraz. I'd say so. That's probably why he's in the top 10 right now. But right now, I'm Team Alcaraz. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.
All right, that went pretty well. I'm overall quite happy with what I said in this video. I think there were a lot of things that I picked up here that are still true in 2025. If I were to update my take, I do think it would sound pretty similar today. I see Carlos Alcaraz right now as the hardest hitter, the fastest mover, and the guy with the best hands, the best soft skills when finesse comes into play. And you just don't see a player at the top in all of those areas. Usually there are sacrifices there with movement and power and finesse. The raw materials of Carlos Alcaraz enable a ceiling, a top level that I still think is beyond Jannik Sinner by a little bit. And what we've started to see is the refinement of Carlos's decision-making, his shot selection, his mental consistency, all of these things where Sinner has been ahead of Carlos in these areas. There's been a higher level of reliability. There has been less ups and downs in terms of performance. And of course, just when it comes to keeping errors down, keeping the ball on the court, playing within oneself, and all of that, Sinner has been ahead. I feel like in 2025, we've seen the refinement of Carlos Alcaraz where he's been able to bring his raw skills and maximize them in a better way than he ever has. And that's why he's had such a strong 2025. And this is still really, really competitive between these two. But I think I still agree with where I stood in 2021, which is that if I'm betting right now on who gets more majors, and of course Alcaraz currently up 6-4 and a hair younger, it's not quite a 50-50 conversation like it was in 2021. But I still think I go with Alcaraz because of those foundational elements that he gets to work with. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.